your head, please rate the images on the screen from a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being feminine and 10 masculine. Let me guess. Most of you probably picked a number between 6 and 10. And how do I know this? Well, I polled the ISP community, and 86% of them rated exactly that. Now, what does this mean? Well, in actuality, it's a very good representation of our society as a whole, as we often equate being muscular to being masculine, but also that a woman who is muscular is often deemed unappealing or threatening. To me, she is beautiful. However, the reaction I get from people when I say I aspire to look just like her is time and again awful. I've heard, why? Why would you want to look like that? You have to preserve your femininity. This left me genuinely questioning whether it's worth it, and doubting my initial desire to attain that look. It led me to wonder about the origins of muscular masculinity, because presumably there must have been a time where being muscular had no societal meaning. But more than that, what it truly means to be a man and woman in our society today, and how these roles have impacted all generations, all from the environment kids are growing up in now to the drastically more open environment that the older generation is adapting to. The story starts around the 19th century, when the concept of being muscular as a core part of the ideal man or the masculinity first emerged. Shortly before then, big, rotund men were seen as the ideal, as it was a manner of showing their success and wealth. Though a renewed interest in ancient Greece sparked a new interpretation of lean and muscular bodies. The Great Exhibition, which occurred in London, had Grecian statues outside the exhibit depicting lean, muscular men, which were seen as godlike. Or army fitness programs, such as in France, soldiers were known and celebrated for their physical fitness. Following this, the United States media, the academics, and the politicians of the 20th century believed popular culture to not be masculine enough. And in Western culture, Christianity dominated, and they too came to perceive the culture as overwhelmingly feminine. Masculine reformers of Christianity began to place weight on being muscular. It resulted in large investments into the world of sports, encouraging young men to be athletic and creating sports leagues by the church, all in the hopes of creating a new generation of gentlemen barbarians. Looking back, in my view, this connection between muscle and religion was a key part to it becoming a societal gender norm. Therefore, as you might expect, since no such connection was made for women in muscle, the reaction to female athletes was somewhat different. For the briefest of time, there was a period of praise. However, soon after, large debates surfaced over the pros and cons to female athletes. Popularly, it was physicians, physician educators, sports writers, athletic officials, or casual viewers, but to clarify, just men. The large controversy in the 1910s and 1920s was over the possible effects it had on the female reproductive system, as well as whether it had diminished or enhanced a woman's feminine charm or sexual appeal. Now, this was the beginning, and might I say, quite an awful one. Though it doesn't get any better. The next 50 years were shaped by critics arguing over the appropriate nature to female competition. Educators feared that rigorous competitive stimulation would endanger the sexuality of female athletes. On the other hand, the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union, supported them in the hopes that sport would strengthen their reproductive system to produce a generation of stalwart American sons, whatever that means. Critics began to claim that sport-induced mannishness disqualified them as candidates for heterosexual romance, with articles coming out on how to get men, for example, a real article from that time, the more or less subtle art of getting a man. More and more, it was implied that female athleticism was contrary to heterosexual appeal. I feel I can personally attest to this, simply because I've often found myself wondering about my future perceived attractiveness if I do continue on this path to becoming muscular. But moving on. These ideas persisted until the 1970s and 1980s, until Arnold Schwarzenegger and Rambo ignited a movement of extreme muscular masculinity. And Hollywood continued to spotlight this idea between the connection of a man's muscular body and his masculine power, whether it be the hot love interest in a romance with six-pack abs, or the strong hero in an action movie. Hopefully to a lot of you this rings true, but this is only one part of the story. Looking at other societies and cultures to allow us to further understand the nuances of how femininity and masculinity in connection to gender are perceived. Such as in East Asia, the inseparable connection between muscle and masculinity never became a popular trend. There, the traditional man of the 1970s and 1980s depicted a salaryman or businessman who was hyper-focused on providing for the family with his career-earned wealth. Manga and boys' love created a generation of men who lacked that same competitive and conformist nature of the previous generations. Through the media, the image of girly or effeminate men continued into the ideas of soft masculinity. Nevertheless, the muscular woman is almost unheard of. Unlike Western culture, they still idolize petite-looking women, which creates an enormous amount of hate and prejudice towards East Asian female athletes. As I was researching this, it further proves that these truly are social constructs, such as in this last example, the media created a new environment, and the newest generation had a new set of ideals and a new set of expectations. But if you still don't believe me, we can often find ideas which go outside the typical gender-conforming agenda in the history of other non-Western countries. The Incas used to worship a dual-gendered god who presented in androgynous clothing. The Sakalams in Madagascar used to raise boys with feminine appearance as girls. Or in Hawaii, where it's even part of their dictionary. Kane means man, wahin, woman, and mahu means, well, somewhere in the middle. You might be wondering how these ideas died out, or why we've never heard of them. Well, agricultural societies perpetuated these traditional gender roles. Thus, with colonization, where farming practices were standardized, these roles were solidified and reinforced. Even so, with gender being a social construct, I would go on to argue that biological sex is a social construct too. I think we can all agree on the current definition of sex: the combination of genitalia, reproductive organs, hormones, chromosomes, secondary sex characteristics, and ultimately the ability to have a baby. Now, just to clarify, me claiming that sex is a social construct doesn't mean I think these things don't exist or that humans don't have them. But male and female creates a societal box into which people need to fit into. However, whether it's intersex people, people born with a mixture of these biological markers, or transgender people, people who can transition to having both markers as well, or cis people, these are people who aren't transgender, who simply don't fit all the standardized criteria. For example, a woman who can't have children. Therefore, I would call biological sex a social construct, because that specific box is something we have fabricated, as you cannot deny that a male who cannot reproduce is still male, yet it defies our definition of being male. But why am I telling you this? Me justifying sex as a social construct is to make you see that everything, masculinity and femininity, man and woman, male and female, are in our heads. They're made up. Trying to use this big concept to stop a very specific issue, that no human body should be deemed unnatural despite messaging that female muscle is. Now that you see the origins of our society's predisposed beliefs, hopefully you'll encourage others to forget about labels, to follow their unique paths, so that a young girl like me doesn't question her future sex appeal just because she likes working out. Does that not seem absurd? Over time, building muscle has become a wrongly gendered action. as it isn't masculine or feminine. Muscle is simply hard work. Thank you.